All right. Thanks everyone for joining, and good morning and good evening. So, yeah, for the sake of others who didn't join, and also to help you to go through the session again, I'd like to keep everyone on mute for maybe next 30, 40 minutes. And then I'll open the session for questions and answers so that any kind of queries that you have, we'll discuss. Okay. So by saying it, what's the agenda here? Now, we don't want to do it like a regular demo to talk about, more about what we are going to do. But if I believe those who have joined here or those who are in the classroom, you are either a fresher or a new college graduate, right, who wants to start your career in IT, or you might be an experienced person or a person from non-IT with certain years of gap, or you want to switch some technology and again kickstart your career in IT, or you could be a working professional in IT who already have experience regardless of how many years, a senior, junior, but again you want to move to a better career path which is not only going to pay you 3 times your salary or 200%, 300% salary, but also a domain which is easy for you to transfer. That is the major point. And a domain which is more steady. When I say steady, there are ups and downs due to the recession, but still, if you are equipped properly with knowledge on what you need, you will be able to survive in the industry. So I believe this is how you can categorize yourself, right? So now, when I was talking about you're a fresher or a non-IT person or a person who's experienced, again, it could be in India or even you might be abroad. Now, you can consider in the market, cloud and DevOps is one of not just an emerging technology, but this is something which is already there in the market for a couple of years, right? So I think before even you just jump into all these, what I would like to discuss today is more about give you a very brief introduction into what is DevOps all about, or what is this cloud and DevOps all about, why organizations need it, and as I said, if you are looking for a better and a highly paid career, for you so that you can survive in IT for the next couple of years easily, or you want to kickstart your career in IT, then you need to know why this is needed. And for you, what are the things that you need to know before you jump into the career? Or how do you make your career more into this technology? Okay, so that's the whole focus is going about. Okay, so by saying that, all of us know there are larger tech giants like Amazon, which you shop almost every day, and you use a lot of shopping things. So some of the companies that, again, not just Amazon, Myntra, pretty much a lot of things are there. And then all of us watch a lot of movies now, or web series. How do you watch it? So what is that called as? What kind of platform? OTT, right? So name some of them. Prime, Hotstar, Netflix, right? So again, these are some of the companies, not just that. Let's also talk about your e-commerce things, like you have Target, Walmart, right? Your banking domain. So almost any kind of domain that you take in the current market, what is that they are looking at? Because day by day, they have lots and lots of challenges, correct? Whether you talk about your Amazon or your Netflix or your Facebook or LinkedIn, right? Whatever that you take. Now, what's happening behind the business? Now, they still have their regular business running. Okay, they develop the product and they try to release the product and we use it. But because of the market need, the challenges that what they are looking at is how do we scale, right? So what do you mean by scaling? Now, suddenly there will be more and more subscribers, more and more users, right? Let's take a simple example of Amazon or Myntra. Regular days, no one will go and shop, but suddenly they would say that there is a week where they will be giving you 20%, 30%. You will be tempted to at least do some shopping. Even if you're not buying, you will browse their site. So obviously there is a lot of load that is being added, right? And sometimes there will be some match, as you said, on your Hotstar or Disney Hotstar, or there will be some awesome web series going on which you'll hear and you'll be tempted to watch it on the weekend. So now what's happening? At a particular time, the business grows and there is a huge load on the application. Now, what they have to do? They have to scale their business. Okay, a simple way I can saying is I can make 30 people seated here in my classroom. Now suddenly I see that 50 people are coming in. So how do I scale my business? That is what everyone is looking at. Whether it's a small organization or a large organization, they need to scale. Then high availability. What is high availability? So whether you log into your Amazon or Netflix or Facebook, whether it's at 3 a.m. in the morning or whether it is in afternoon or morning or evening, you need the application to be available, right? So you're very bored. You open YouTube and try to see something. You open Netflix and watch movies, or you do some shopping. You need that to be available 24 bar 7. So a company also wants to make sure it's not about just scaling. So whatever the business they are running, it should be always available. Okay. So I'm not comparing with IRCTC or anything, but if you have remember a couple of years back, your bank websites or your booking sites like IRCTC, which is a training site, what will happen? It will not connect. Now that is not happening with Amazon. That's not happening with Netflix. That's not happening with your LinkedIn, right? Why? Because they are ensuring everything is scalable and at the same time it's highly available. Okay. Now, is that sufficient? No. Another thing, because of the market competence, is continuous delivery. As I said, if Amazon comes up with a week of fashion sale, the next week Myntra comes up with a fashion sale saying that I'm trying to give you something. Looking at it, you will see Agio coming in and they will say that I'm coming up with a sale. Now, do you think the sale is ending now? No. Earlier, when I say earlier, maybe around during the lockdown, it used to be once a year, right? But now Amazon, Myntra, Agio, they are having sales almost every 2 months. If you know it or don't know, they are provoking you to shop. Now, what is that they are doing? They are continuously coming up with new products, new marketing stuffs. So that way, as a business, I want to continuously deliver, correct? So for me, the customer should use, then I should create the product and I should be able to deliver, correct? So how do you make sure as an organization, whatever is needed, you have to continuously work and keep delivering it, right? Like it's a, a biryani shop. I want to make sure I sell biryani morning, evening, and dinner. How can I make it? So I should be ensuring if I have to deliver biryani in the morning, I should be cooking it overnight continuously and then I can sell. If I want to deliver biryanis in the night, then from early morning I should be preparing, only then I can start delivering it from lunch to dinner. Correct? So the same way, every businesses is looking at continuously delivering, because only then they would be able to achieve their business. And when we talk about all these things, everything is through web, through internet. So any kind of business or application that you are trying to access has to be completely secure. Because will you be happy if your Facebook account is hacked, your Mintra account is hacked, your Netflix account is hacked, your bank account is hacked? No, right? So that's where an organization are also heavily investing to ensure not just their application but their entire business is secure. And not just to that, let me just give a small example of Netflix. Do you know why Netflix business went down recently? Is because we use kind of multiple logins, correct? So then nowadays, what is that they have done? They have restricted so that whether you log in through your mobile or TV at a time, one person. So now obviously the business will start coming up. So you want two-person to watch at the same time, subscribe accordingly. So that's where security doesn't mean it's always about unauthorized access, but also to make sure our details are secure. Okay, so this is the ultimate need of any kind of organization you join. Okay, whether it's a small or a business, or whether it's a retail business or an e-commerce business or a banking domain, or from your sites, whatever that you kind of consider for your social marketing. Okay, so this is the need. Now, is this the only need? No. So what I'm talking about is there's already some kind of business that is running, but they have to make sure in their business these are adopted. Okay, and this is where the market gave rise to a new technology, which is what we call it as cloud and DevOps. Now there are different names. I'll try to give you more clarity on it, but a familiar name that what you might be knowing is cloud and DevOps. Okay, so companies started adopting this long back. Okay, now there are companies who have completely adopted this, but still there are some companies who are on the way. Maybe half of it is done and other half they are trying to achieve, or there are new startups who want to completely move to this kind of technology. Now why they want to do is this. So this is where industry started implementing a new technology or more of a business oriented approach to help them in getting all these things, and that's purely what we call it as cloud and DevOps. Okay, so by saying it, who is going to do all these things? Because there are a lot of activities you have to do to achieve. Okay, so this is where whenever we say an IT company, now we know that there are developers, there are QA engineers, and there are someone who will support the machine. Either you call them as operations team or admin team or support team. So usually you will be dividing it them into only three categories. Okay, but for these things, companies want people to help not just doing their day-to-day activity, but also to focus on as an organization goal, what is that we can do. Okay, and that's where what's happening is every company needs some specific set of skills, specific responsibilities that you should be taking care. Okay, I think this is what most of us are not clear with. So you can already be a developer or a QA engineer or a operation person or a support person. Rather than doing your regular work, they now also need people to do something additionally to achieve these things. Okay, because only then you will be able to do. Same way, they might also start taking some engineers who has responsibility only to help on this and not to focus too much into development, because that way what will happen, my existing employees like existing developers or QA will focus only on their day-to-day work. However, we will take new engineers who are specialized only in these areas. So which is where we call them as dedicated DevOps engineers. Okay. So now who is going to be a DevOps engineer in an organization? Either someone who has responsibility only to help in these things for the company to achieve, or you would be an existing developer or a QA or an operations or an admin person who are willing to take additional responsibilities to help the company. Okay, so that's the primary requirement. Okay, now that's when companies are ready to pay 3 times or 4 times or 100% or 200% salary. So it is not for a person who will put in their profile that I am a DevOps engineer, but it is for the person who knows what are the things or what are the problems that you would get in a company and how can you solve that problem for the company to achieve this. So this is how, as of now, companies are going to pay people who are not just doing your regular task but focusing about solving the problem what a company has additionally. And that's where you see there's a crazy amount of salary being paid. Same way, by putting DevOps engineer as your title, there are still people who are not even getting job because you are not meeting the expectation of the organization. Because my requirement, let's say, is to solve a problem in achieving this. And if I have a responsibility of that engineer, and if you don't know that, correct, then what will happen? So obviously I'll not be able to pay. So that's where now, if you understand, it is very important for us to know if a company is trying to hire a person to take care of this responsibility, being a part of the cloud or DevOps technology, then it is important for us to know what are those responsibilities. Okay, getting it? So what are those responsibilities that you are going to work? Because only if you are aware, then companies will be able to hire you. So that's where now, for a company to achieve these as a broader goal, there are lots of small and small problems that we have to solve, because we are not just talking about one task to be done, because we are talking about continuously delivering certain things in which you have to make sure you have a scalability, high availability, as well as security. So how do you achieve? And that's when, right from the beginning of a product getting created or developed, tested, deployed, and putting into production or maintaining it, there are a lot of challenges that you have to go through. And that's when we say DevOps, it's not just about one tool. It's about various process which will be implemented to solve various problems. Okay, so this is on top of your development, testing, and administration, because whatever the challenges that they are facing in the development, testing, and administration, DevOps is going to give us something called as a strategy or a process with the help of which you can solve it. Now, how do you solve that? Now, this is where you need to first know what is that problem which companies are facing, and what is the strategy that you're going to give through DevOps. And whenever I say a strategy, it is about a change in a process, because there could be something which you have already done, but how do you do it better? That is what we call it as a strategy. And anytime when you say an automation with the help of a process, then it's not just process, but you have to use some softwares or tools using which you will be able to achieve it. So that's when you need to know first, what is that a company expecting to become a DevOps engineer? So in that, what are the problems that companies have? And through this technology called as DevOps or cloud, what are those strategies, which includes an automation, what is the best way to do it, and what are the tools to achieve it? Okay, so once you start knowing it, then as you start applying to a company, you would be able to easily understand for a particular set of responsibility what are the tool sets that you need to prepare. So I'll also go into it deeper, but with this, now let's try to understand what are those strategies which organizations are using to achieve the goals that what we talked about. Okay, now broadly, as of now in 2023, you have close to 9 or 10 strategies. Okay, which means there are 10 responsibilities that you are going to have to solve or to help a company in achieving those goals. Okay, so that way these are not just strategies, but these are the responsibilities of you becoming a DevOps engineer and helping an organization. Okay, now in each of the strategy and each of the responsibility, there is a process that you will use, and there is a tool which you will use in order to solve a particular type of problem. Okay, so what are those strategies or those processes that we need to know in terms of automation? Now, the very first thing is continuous development. Okay, now this is not something new. Development is the very core of any product, correct? Now, people develop, whether you use Java, .NET, okay, or modern programming languages like Go language, Python, okay, so anything like that. Now, what are we looking at? Now, people are developing. They are developing from many decades. But what a company wants now is to achieve a continuous delivery of your product. The very first thing to do is develop continuously. So, what do you mean by develop continuously? Now, you have your product getting delivered to different customers at different time. The same way, there will be a lot of things that you have to do in parallel. So that's when, for every company, it is not one product or one software that they are delivering. There are many things that they have to develop in parallel. So how do you achieve all these things within a given time? And when I talk about code, we are not talking about just a single file. So now if you look at a company, there will be many products. Same product will be delivered to different customers at different time. So there will be lots and lots of code. So when I say code, that is the actual program that you call it as the Java language, Go language, C, C++, .NET, whatever you take. So how are you going to manage this thousands and thousands of code, which is nothing but thousands and thousands of file? So there should be a proper way in which we store it and we manage, because continuous development is not about just writing the code and storing it. How do I make sure that whenever I want, I can take the correct code, create a product and give it to the customer, or test it and then give it to the customer? So there should be a proper way to do the coding, because if I mess in the coding, nothing else will happen further, correct? That's where when we talk about continuous development, we need to make sure that not just the developers but also the QA has the right access to the right files, and we know how exactly everything is getting organized. So that is where we have process called as agile. Okay, so what DevOps says is, for your company to work in this model of continuous development, you need to adapt to a process called agile. So in the agile, there is a proper way where we will tell who should do what and when you are going to do and how do we track it. Okay, and along with it, in continuous development, there is another process which organizations tells is about using something called as a version controlling tool. Okay, so version controlling system or version controlling tool is nothing but a software where you can store all your code and you can manage it, so that if the same code is being used for different client to do parallel development at the same time, it will happen. So that's how same product, multiple people can work at the same time without overlapping or without getting the code broken. So this is when in continuous development, now this continuous development is a strategy. Now in that, DevOps says use process like agile and use a process like version controlling system and help the development and QA team to start writing whatever the code they want. Okay, so this is about the process, just a small intro. Now, how do you achieve it? Obviously, you need to have tools. So that's where to achieve the agile methodologies, so you will be using tool like Jira or something similar to that, but one of the popular tool when you go to company, you will be using Jira. So that's how you track what you are doing, when you want to do, what is the priority of it. And when you start coming to version controlling system, now this is one of the old process. Now that's where DevOps says it's not about using version controlling system, but using a modern version controlling system like distributed version controlling system in which everything can be done faster. And that's where a tool like Git is quite popular. Okay, so as soon as we say Git is just a client side. So you also have something called a server side for it, and that's where you have other popular tools like GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket. So now when you go to a company and as a DevOps engineer, the first responsibility that you're going to take care of is helping them to achieve continuous development. And what are you going to do? Implement a process called Agile, implement a process called version controlling system. May not be implementing, it's already there, then you should enhance. And for that, you would be working on tools like Jira, Git, GitLab, or GitHub. Okay. Now, what's the next thing? Now, as an organization, so you have developers, you have QA, you have administrators, or you have people who will be taking care of the production environment. What is that we need? Now, all this infrastructure has been moved from on-premises to cloud. On-premises means they will have their own data center machines in the company physically. Instead of that, everything is moved to cloud. Okay. However, now we are talking about I need the infrastructure to be scaled on cloud. So this is where you might be using AWS or Azure or GCP. Now, like I said, when you're working for a larger companies or a smaller companies, you want to suddenly create 100 machines. So, do you think you will be able to go to AWS or Azure and create 100 machines? You can, but are you going to click on something 100 times and create? Because it will take time. So, going to cloud will not solve everything. See, going to cloud will help you to scale your business. But what we are looking at, how do I scale faster? And how do I scale in a consistent way? Consistent means I want 100 machines, all the 100 should be the same, correct? So how do I make sure? That's where you need a process which can help you to do that. So remember, using cloud alone is not sufficient, but for us to scale our business and also to make sure it is consistent, and the biggest another challenge that we have now is market is not going to use one cloud. So you will see for one client, you will be using AWS. For another client, you will be using Azure. So whatever that you are doing, how do you do it? In the same way. Now that's where in DevOps, we have a new process called as infrastructure as code. Okay. So what do you mean by infrastructure as code? So whatever the infrastructure, that is the machine, database, network for your development, testing or production that you want to create, you are going to create it in cloud. But to automate it, rather than going to some dashboard and clicking 100 times, you can write some small code. So when I say code, it's not program, it's more of a syntax. Now, let me talk about this a little later on what exactly do we mean by code. So now when I say code, I'm talking about a small syntax, which could be 1 or 2 lines where you will tell, go to AWS and create 100 machines. Okay, so that's how you cannot do the automation through your UI or dashboard because you have to click on that couple of times. Instead, through some code or a syntax, we will be able to achieve the same automation. So this is when in DevOps, infrastructure as a code is a process where you tell what is that you need on the cloud or on the infrastructure through some syntax, and the process or the automation will take care of achieving it. So this is how now if I'm working for Amazon or Netflix or any big companies, what will happen for scaling? If I want to create even 1,000 machines, I will just write 2 lines of code and I will tell I need 1,000 machines, and within a matter of second my automation or the process will go to AWS or Azure and create those 1,000 machines. Okay, so that's how now as an DevOps engineer you are responsible to help a company to create all the infrastructure on the cloud, whether it is completely new or whether it is existing to manage. You should be able to handle it. So that's where infrastructure as a code is the second strategy which you will be working on. Now, as soon as I say a process or a strategy, then I said there is also a tool. So some of the popular tools that you have in the market to help you work in this process called infra as code, couple of them are Terraform. Now, why Terraform is because Terraform is cloud agnostic. Cloud agnostic means using Terraform, I can connect to AWS or Azure. But if you are working only on AWS, then you might be using CloudFormation. If you are working only on Azure, then you might be using something called as ARM, okay, Azure Resource Manager. So this is how, using these tools of the choice, you are going to help a company in solving the problem for infrastructure. So that's where your second responsibility in an organization will be to work on infra as code, and that will help you to automate the infrastructure, which could be for scaling or for stability. Okay. Now, then comes the third point. Okay, so we talked about development, continuous, we talked about infra as code. Now, when you say production or for development or testing, it's not about creating hundreds of machines. Now, what happens after that? Once you create a machine, inside the machine, you need to configure them, correct? Because, for example, let's say we have 10 people here. Now, I'm going to create 10 machines for all of you through infra as code. But all the 10 of you are not going to work in the same way, because few might be working as developers, few might be working as QA people, and few might be working with customers for some production. So I can create machine using infra as code, but now what is the next thing I have to do? I have to configure the machine for each of your need, because for development activity, you need different softwares, you need different applications or files or permissions on that machine. For testing, you need different applications or process. And for production, you need something different. So this is when, how are you going to configure those machines for various requirements? And that's when in DevOps, the third strategy to automate the configuration of the service is what we call it as configuration management. Now, some of them also call it as configuration as code. So what are you trying to solve in this? You are going to automate the process of configuring different machines, so that using infra as code, I can create 100 machines. And in the same 100 machines, with the help of configuration management or configuration as a code, I can connect and configure that machines differently. Okay. So this is how, whether it is 100 machines or 1000 machines, you can configure different machines with different requirements at any point of time. So that's how for you things will be faster. Okay. So again, configuration management or configuration as a code is an automation process, and for that there are tools available in the market. Now earlier we used to have tools like Chef, SaltStack, Puppet, but right now one of the popular tools that you would be hearing is Ansible. So your third responsibility when you join a company or when you're going to join a company as DevOps engineer is to support the automation of machines using configuration management. Okay. Then, okay, so we talked about infrastructure creation, configuring a machine, and we are also helping with continuous development where we can store all the code properly. But what happens after that? So this is where now developers will be writing code, okay, and there will be QA on the other side. How do I integrate both of them? Because when will QA start their work? Only when a developer completes his work and gives it to him, correct? So now the question is, when do you say a developer will complete his work? A developer will complete his work not when you write the program and store it. You will say you are complete when whatever the functionality that is needed is achieved by you. Okay. Now this is where what will QA do? QA will take your code and do the functionality testing. But what if there are some small issues like your syntax errors, okay, or there are some minute bugs which could be for a vulnerability issue which could cause a security concern later. Now these are the things which QA team will not be able to help. But what will happen now? QA will be testing your code only at certain point of time. Okay, because now if you are a developer, you complete your work. Let's say you complete your work at 10 o'clock in the morning. Now QA is taking your code only at evening. Now, if they come back and say, hey, I am not even able to test your code because your code has some problem. It is not functionality, but your code has some problem. Maybe it is not getting integrated with other code. It is not even starting, or it has some vulnerability. So now, as a developer, you are still going to go back and start fixing it. So what is the problem here? Your whole day is wasted. Your QA's time is also wasted. So now, if when I say continuous development, it is not about storing the code, but if my developer or QA is not in a situation to know whether they have completed their work or not, how will I do continuous delivery? Because when do I do continuous delivery? I develop continuously, I test continuously, and then I can deliver. So now, even though continuous development is implemented, there is a gap between development and testing. So that's where, to bridge this gap, we are going to introduce a new process or a strategy called as continuous integration. So what we are going to do in this process is, as soon as a developer writes a code, we are not going to wait for QA. Immediately, we take his code, we combine this code with other existing code, and we check whether the code is good code, not just in terms of program, but we will also check whether it is secure in terms of vulnerability. Vulnerability means, is there any issue? Can someone hack your code? Have you taken some third-party code unnecessarily? All those things can be validated. And can we create a product out of your code? We are going to check, and then we are going to give it to QA. So this way, by adopting to this process, every developer will know as soon as he writes the code and completes his code, whether his code is good, can I give it to QA, or is there something that I have to fix? So by doing it, what will happen? We will be able to detect bugs faster. QA can also do their testing faster, and also helps the entire organization to deliver the product. So that's where continuous integration is one advanced process which we want to help by implementing between development and testing. Okay. So how do I achieve it? Now, continuous integration is not a small task. So it has a lot of things to do. Like I said, you are going to take the code, you are going to build the code, you are going to scan the code for different kind of issues or vulnerabilities, and we are going to create a product and give it to QA. Okay, so that way, for different activities, there are different tools involved. But from a larger note, some of the popular tools for implementing this process called continuous integration are Circle CI, ThemeCity, Bamboo, but one of the popular tools that you have in the market, which is Jenkins. So when you now go to an organization and apply as a DevOps engineer, the fourth responsibility that you would be having is to work on a process called continuous integration, and thus you will be helping to bridge the gap between QA and development teams. Okay. Then another interesting and one of the popular and most required process is containerization. So now we talked about creating infra faster. We talked about configuring machines better way. And we also saw how do I integrate the process of checking whether the code is good between developer and QA. Okay, now we gave the code to QA. QA has to deploy your application. Deploy means you have to install and run the application so that they can do the testing. Same way, when QA completes, we need to now deploy and install our application on all the production servers. Because let's say the same problem in the beginning. For my production, I need not 100 machines, but I need 100 machines in which 100 copy of my application is running. Only because of that, all the users can access your Amazon or your Netflix or Facebook, LinkedIn, or anything related to it. Okay, so now infra as a code will create 100 machines. Configuration management will configure 100 machines. But now what I want, whatever that I'm getting from continuous integration, I want to be installed and deployed on all those 100 machines. So running your application is what we call it as deployment. So how do I do it? Now I need to do it faster, and I also need to do it in an easier way, because when you take an application, the application will not run the same on every machine. So can I take an application, can I install it on my Windows and I can take it on Linux, will it work? Or will it work on Mac? Same thing like your mobile. You install an app for your Android, do you think it is the same thing for iOS? No. So that's where there is something called as portability comes. Okay. So now what will happen as an organization, regardless of what kind of machines I have, if I want to run my application, which is what we call it as technically deploying, how do you do it faster and how do you do it in an easier way? And that's where there is a new concept called containerization. Now it is an advanced level of virtualization. Now for those who know what is VMware or VMs, it is a little bit advanced concept of the same. Okay, so that way, using this process called as containerization, you will be able to deploy your application faster on any number of machines, any copy, without worrying what is the OS. Okay, so this is when what will happen now. Along with infra as a code, configuration management, and continuous integration, you are going to now ensure how can you deploy your application faster. So that's where this is the fifth or fourth strategy that you're going to have in a company. Okay, so that's where now to work in this, there are different tools you have in the market. Okay, now pretty much you have tools like Rocket, Containerd, but one of the again popular tool that you can use to work on containerization is Docker. Okay, now what will containerization do is give the ability to deploy your product on any machine anytime. So that is what is containerization. But however, it's not so simple as what we are talking, because containerization can run only on one machine at a time, but you can make multiple copies of it. But in reality, when we say I have multiple machines, like hundreds or thousands of machines, okay, how do I run this product as a containerization on all this machine? Because all these machines will be connected as a cluster. So this is when in the deployment, on top of containerization, we do something called as an orchestration. Orchestration means you have the ability to run your application across any number of machines, wherein you want 100 copies, 200 copies, you can just scale it like this in second. Not only that, you can also make sure something called as rolling update, because in reality what happens, you are not always going to run one software. Software is getting developed day by day, tested day by day. Now you have to replace old one with new one. Okay, so you are accessing your Amazon, Netflix. What is happening on the back end? The software is getting updated. So how do you do all those updates across hundreds of machines without impacting the customer? So that's where now, to manage the concept of containers on multiple machines, you need another process that we have to implement called as deployment orchestration. So this is where now this is one of the most expected requirement of everyone to work in DevOps, because containerization was already there, but it was focused on one machine. But when you have multiple machines, your orchestration comes into the picture. And by saying it, there are a lot of tools But one tool which stands out in the market, and this is what everyone talks about, is Kubernetes. So this way, for a company, now if you say, I can create a machine using infra as code, I can configure the machine using configuration management, I can create a product which can be deployed anytime using containerization, but to run that across multiple machines, I need to have an orchestration tool like Kubernetes. Okay, so that's where this will be another most important strategy or a responsibility that a person should be taking care. Now what's next? Now this is where, okay, we were talking about continuous integration, continuous development, and I'm also talking about containerization, and I'm also talking about orchestration. Now each one of them are separate, but for a company like a factory, have you ever seen or heard how does things happen in a factory? There's a things of stuffs which happens in sequence, like there will be a conveyor belt, everything gets moved and things just kept moving one by one. Like if you are seeing a car or even a small chips factory, what happens? Potato gets loaded, it gets cleaned, it gets chopped, and then it gets dried, it gets added with some masala or your salt, and then it gets packed. Everything is automated sequentially. The same way for an organization like Amazon or Flipkart or your whatever Netflix or anything you take, development is happening, testing is happening. Now, how do I integrate all these things? So that's where we need a process which will connect all those things what I'm talking about. So I should be able to connect development, continuous integration, testing, containerization, and orchestration. All of them has to be connected. So that's how from beginning to end, I have a seamless process so that I can deliver my product very fast. So this is what in short we call it as CICD. Okay. So this is where DevOps needs this process to be implemented. Okay. Now, once again, this sounds very small, but we are talking about various processes getting integrated and automated. Okay. And that's when there are a lot of tools available in the market like Spinnaker, Flex, or Harness. But out of that, there are most popular tools like Helm or Argo CD, using which, in combination with tools like Jenkins, Docker, and Kubernetes, you will be using these tools to ensure a continuous delivery of your application happens. So that's where if you now visualize like a factory in your software companies, as soon as a developer writes a code, immediately we will take it, build a product, and then create a deliverable out of it, test it, and immediately deploy so that customers or someone can access it. So end to end happens to this. And that's where, as a DevOps person, when you join a company, one of the critical responsibility that you would be taking care of is enabling this continuous delivery implementation. And then, so now, like when a company is implementing DevOps, and as an individual, you are now taking care of so many responsibilities that I talked. So for all of them, there are lots and lots of tools available, correct? So I'm telling for version controlling, you will use a tool like Git and GitLab or GitHub. Now for builds and continuous integration, you are using tools like Jenkins, Artifactory, SonarQube, blah, blah, whatever you have. And for containerization, you might use Docker. And for orchestration, you might use Kubernetes, right? And then for CI/CD, again, you might be using on top of things like Helm or Argo CD, right? There's lots of tools you will use. Now, these are only the tools that I'm talking about, the implementation of DevOps. But other than that, for running your application as a product, you will also have lots of databases. You will also have other services, okay? Like what? You might be having log maintaining services, or there might be some streaming process, there might be some caching servers, right? So that's how, when you have lots and lots of applications that you have to take care, it is a responsibility that this DevOps will say, don't just think of automation, but also make sure all these machines, servers, applications, you are monitoring. Why? That's what we call it as high availability. Okay, because in the very beginning I told you, it's not about watch the movie. If you go to Facebook, you should be able to see the updates. So everything is available. That's how only when we monitor them, we will be knowing. So monitoring is not just monitoring one time. You're going to continuously monitor 24 bar 7. And that's where in DevOps, continuous monitoring is a process which helps to automate whatever that you want to monitor, whether it's a machine or whether it's an application or a service, whether developer is using or QA is using or someone as a customer is using. Now, this is when there are lots of tools once again available, because if you want to monitor your applications or machines, then you will be using tools like Datadog or Prometheus that will help you to monitor. But when we say monitoring, monitoring doesn't just stop only by connecting to a machine or an application. You also need to see data. So that's where monitoring has things like collecting data and reporting, because you need to collect the necessary information and send proper notification or alert. Only then you will be knowing whether something is working or not. Why? Think a reality. Your company will have 10,000 servers. Do you think you have time to watch all the 10,000 servers every 1 minute? No. So that's where the monitoring should be set up in such a way you collect all the information and alert appropriately whether it is critical or if there is a problem. So that's where for monitoring, we have a set of tools like Prometheus, Datadog to show you the data and to send alerts and visualization. There are different tools like Splunk, your App Dynamics or Grafana. Same way. Now you have all the different logs from application. Where are you going to store all the logs? Now, why do you need logs? If something goes wrong, if I come back and look at it, I should have all the data. Only then I can debug. So that way there are separate log monitoring tools. And that's when you have tools like Fluentd, Elasticsearch, Kibana. So this is where for a company, DevOps says implement continuous monitoring. But for that, depending on your organization need, you need to set up various tools and implement. So this will be another responsibility that a company expects someone to work in the concept of DevOps. Okay. And finally, DevSecOps. So what is DevSecOps? So DevOps, again, as I said, is emerging day by day, because slowly what happened, DevOps, when it was a couple of years back, there was all the automation that we are talking. But things started growing up so fast, security was becoming very critical. So that's when in every company, whether they are moving to DevOps or they have already moved to DevOps, they want to enable security at every level. So whether you are doing continuous development automation, infra as code automation, configuration management automation, or CI process, that is continuous integration, or containerization, or orchestration, or even your continuous monitoring, requesting everyone to implement this strategy called DevSecOps, which is nothing but security at every process that you are automating. So that's where in all those things what we are talking about, whether it is your product code or whether it is your infra as code, configuration management, containerization or orchestration, make sure everything is secure. And that's where in DevSecOps, there are various tools that you will be adding on top of your existing stuff. So if you are using Terraform, then there are some tools specifically to ensure it is secure. So you are using Jenkins or a CI pipeline, then you are going to use some additional tools like SonarQube or a couple of them related to OWASP to ensure that they are secure. Now you are using Docker or Kubernetes, then you are also going to make sure that there are certain tools with using which you will be making sure that everything is secure. And when we talk about organization and automation, there are a lot of credentials that you have to store and maintain, because now I'm telling you, you are working in a company as a DevOps engineer, you are now handling thousands of machines and you have multiple applications and different username, passwords, and credentials to store. Where are you going to store? So there needs to be a better way to manage your secret. And one of the popular tool, again, you might be hearing about this, is HashiCorp Vault. So what DevSecOps says is secure everything that you are doing to automate what is needed for a company. So this is going to be another responsibility what everyone has to take up in this DevOps. And finally comes a new, it is not again a new process, but an existing process, because so far we used to have system admins or database admin. Now we moved them from on-premises to cloud. So there used to be a separate administrator for your infrastructure. So that's where when you go to a company, you will be having a separate AWS admin or Azure admin. But what's happening now, we don't want to have something dedicated. Instead, we are already creating infrastructure as code. So I know how to connect to my AWS or Azure. So we don't need someone separate. So that's how what is happening. Those profiles are getting added. So now in DevOps, it is not about creating a machine and monitoring. You also take care of the day-to-day operations of that. Because when you can automate so many things, you can also take it up. So that's where one of the new responsibility that is added to your DevOps is to take care of the cloud operations that is needed day to day. Now that doesn't mean you have to be an administrator in it. Still, for the entire company of, let's say I have 100 employees, I can have only 2 administrators, but I can have 10 DevOps engineers who can take care of all the cloud operations needed for that 100 people. So that's how you can see the number of people needed to do administration is reduced, and we are adding more people to do the operations along with the automation. So that's how CloudOps will be not just a process which DevOps says, but every company wants you to take it up as a responsibility. Okay. So with this, now, if you are going to apply as a DevOps engineer, or if you are looking at an organization's profile or a job description on DevOps engineer, it will be the combination of what we have talked about, 10 responsibilities. Okay. So when you go to a company, you would be working on all of them, or it could be on only couple of responsibilities depending on the need. But it's like you need to have the knowledge of all those 10 responsibilities or the areas of automation. So coming to the next point, for you to begin, what you should do. So the first step to know is, okay, now in the market, DevOps or CloudOps means there are 10 best practices, there are 10 strategies or responsibilities. That's what the first thing you need to know. Okay. Then in each one of them, you need to learn at least one tool, because unfortunately we are in a situation, I cannot learn too many things in the same technology. Okay. For example, if you take cloud, you don't have time to get into a job after 1 year, right? So you want to get into a job in a matter of days or in a matter of weeks or month. So that way, target on picking up all those 10 strategies, and in each one of them, pick one tool which is most popular in the market. So that way, you can easily survive, and anything new comes up, you can try to correlate and learn that also. But when you're choosing a tool, don't choose a tool something which is too old, because people will say, hey, this is running from 5 years, 10 years. When you go to a company, they are always expecting latest. So consider a tool which is latest and which is most popular, and it should be a cloud native funded. What do you mean by cloud native funded? This means the tool that you are taking should be more supporting the cloud. Okay, because if I take a tool and if I say this will work only on on-prem, companies will not even know what tool you are using. So if you say the same tool, this can work on AWS or Azure, things will be easy. So that's where when you choose a tool which is more supported by the cloud native foundation, which means it's more supporting cloud activities and which is latest, and make sure now you have 10 strategies. In all of them, you should be aware of one tool so that you can implement whatever the automation you want from all of them end to end. Okay. And then the next biggest question that people will ask is, oh, you're talking about infra as code, you're talking about configuration as a code. Does it really need coding? Okay. Or in order for me to work in DevOps or for a company to help to do all this DevOps automation, should I need to know coding? So first thing, let's answer, coding is needed, but is coding and programming the same? No. So that's where your .NET, Java, C, C++, Ruby or Go language is what we call it as programming. But what is this process which DevOps is telling? It is talking about more automation. So coding is not programming, but then what is coding? So coding is more of writing some small syntax to achieve certain automation, like a template. When I say template, now in your school days you would have applied for leave. So there is a specific way to write a leave letter. Okay. So whatever you write, that's also called as coding. Now you are applying for a college or you are applying for a company. Now there is a proper way you should write something. So that is what generally called as code. So code is a syntax or a template that you should be follow. So this is when in DevOps, whether you are talking about infrastructure as code, configuration management, containerization, continuous integration, or your deployments or orchestration or monitoring, many tools use some configuration file in which you should be giving some small syntax. So that's when now to develop all those things, you need to know a small syntax related to that tool. So that's how Docker uses a tool called Dockerfile. Kubernetes uses a file called YAML, which is technically called as manifest. Ansible also uses a YAML file, which we call it as playbook. Terraform uses a .tf file. Now, what are you going to put inside it? Some syntax. So that is what is called as coding. So don't get scared or worried that I'm not from a programming language. Will I be able to convert? No. So you don't need to know programming. But when you start learning this tool, it is not the tool you are learning, but it is the code or the syntax what you have to put. Okay. So what is coding? Knowing the syntax of how to use that tool is called as coding. So definitely coding is needed, but you don't need programming for implementing DevOps. Then comes another question. Then what is scripting? Things like shell script and Python. Now, unfortunately, Python has something called as scripting and programming. You can divide it into two levels. But what is scripting? So you can think of it as sister of programming. Okay. So instead of doing things complex, you can combine your day-to-day Linux commands or Windows commands with some syntax added, and you can automate things. So that is what we call it as scripting. Okay. Because now in day-to-day, when you are working on something like Windows or Linux, there will be a lot of commands that you have to run. Now, if I want you to run some 20-30 commands, it will not be possible for you to sit and do. So that's where to run those 20-30 commands together, you need a file, and that file is called as script. So is it mandatory for knowing scripting? It is again depending on what level that you are going into the market. So if you are going as a DevOps engineer for a junior level, it might not be needed, but it is good to have. But when you go as a senior, what is the difference between you and others? Because now everyone will talk about the same tool, but how is that you are different as a senior with 3 years, 4 years or 10 years? So you can do automation little better. So that's where knowing a scripting is always good, but it is not mandatory. But also, this is where when you say a fresher is also getting anywhere between 8 lakhs to 10 lakhs or 12 lakhs. A person with also 2 years of experience is getting 15 lakhs to 18 lakhs. A person with 5 years experience is also easily getting 30 to 60 lakhs. Why? That's because the more you know, it's always the salary will be more. So that's where in this DevOps, people are not paid for number of experience, but people are paid for more things you know. So that's where it's good to know that you are aware of any one of the scripting, but it's not mandatory. But as the experience grows, you should be able to know something. Okay. Then comes the last part. Okay, so now you told me I want to become a DevOps engineer, then I need to know the 10 strategies, one tool in each one of them, and I don't have to worry about programming, but I need to know the syntax of some tool. Okay, so how do I get started? So this is where, whether you are a fresher or from a non-IT background, or even you are an experienced person, the first thing you should focus is a step one of learning all the fundamental things that is needed. So which is what I prefer to call it as foundation. So what is foundation? So you should be now first familiar with one operating system like Linux. Why? Because we are talking about so much of automation. You will be doing everything mostly on Linux machine. So it's not like your laptop, because you will use your laptop. From your laptop, you will connect to a AWS or Azure machine, and that will be a Linux machine. So you should be familiar with Linux. Just like how you know Windows, you should be know Linux. And along with it, I was talking about the version controlling system, because this is where now, if you see, even as a developer, you are writing some program or a code. A QA will also write a code. You as a DevOps engineer or a support person will also try to write some code. So end of the day, you are going to store so many files. So where are you going to store? So you need to follow the version controlling. So the very basic foundation for becoming a DevOps engineer is to know these two. Okay. Now, once you know this and you have the confidence of the basic things, next you are going to learn what I prefer to say it as the DevOps core. So what is the core? Those 9 to 10 strategies that you want to learn. So pick all the 9 and one tool out of it which is more latest and try to learn. So this way, with the foundation, you will be able to know all those that is needed for the DevOps. And what after that? And after that, this is where you need to get into the cloud operations. So once again, choose any one of the cloud and see how all these things can be implemented. Because when you're learning the DevOps core, you can take any platform like AWS or Azure and just focus on how to install that tool and how to use the tool. But now what is cloud ops? How do I scale my machine? How do I add more resources? How do I create a database? How do I create a network? You should start looking into the internals of the cloud. And that's where, after your DevOps core, start knowing how the operations happens on that cloud. And again, pick any one of the cloud. And pretty much once you have done with this, then the fourth step is to get into scripting. Now I'm talking only for those who don't know. Now if you're already familiar, it's good to add at every level. So finally now go and try to learn any one of the scripting, and see on top of that you will be able to use your automation skill. So this is how, with all this knowledge, you will be able to get into the market and start applying and matching the requirement for what is needed for becoming a DevOps engineer at various positions. Okay. Now, another catch that I want to give. Now in 2023, what is happening? So I was talking about this 9 strategies that you want to implement. You are going to use a platform, which is a cloud platform, which could be on AWS or Azure. Now, when you learn those 9 strategies, you are going to learn most of them as an open source tool, which can run on AWS or Azure or GCP. It doesn't matter. But unfortunately, because of the market competition, certain organizations use AWS, certain organizations use Azure. Okay. Now, for you to understand what they will do, now, if the company is using completely open source tools, then it doesn't matter which cloud that you are into, you will use the same set of tool. So that's where in all the companies, 70% of DevOps tools and implementation will be common. Now the 30% varies. Where does it vary? It doesn't vary in the process, but it varies in the tool. Now that's where, when you go to AWS, usually the companies using AWS use most of them 90% open source. Okay, but now those companies which have started moving to Microsoft based Azure, For certain things like the pipelines or managing your artifacts or repositories, they don't use open source tool. So that's where those 25% to 30% difference what I was telling. So instead, what they do is they use some services already available in Azure. Okay, so that's where even when you open Azure DevOps engineer or a DevOps engineer working on Azure, you will still be working on tool like Docker, Terraform, Ansible, Kubernetes, Prometheus, everything will be there. But to run your pipelines like CICD, they don't use Jenkins. Instead, they will be using Azure pipeline. Now, if you want to store all the files that you want, you will use GitLab or GitHub when you are focusing on AWS. But when you come to Azure, they will be using most of the things as GitHub, or they will be using Azure Repo. So that's how there's a small difference on how to run that on Azure by knowing that service. So this is where in market, you will not be able to just go and match any requirement. So what you have to do now is, if you want to make your profile much more wider, on top of whatever I said, okay, you learned one cloud, you learned all the 9 strategies, and you know cloud ops. But additionally, if you now know a little bit of only on this Azure, what we call it as the Azure DevOps services, wherein whether I can use Jenkins or Azure pipeline. Now, whether I can use GitHub or GitLab, or I can use Azure Repo. So what will happen? Your profile will be much more wider. Okay, so that now your profile will match with most of the openings that you have. So whether the company is on AWS or whether they are in Azure, it doesn't matter. Why? Because you're going to talk about the same concept, but if it's a AWS based company, you can match 100% with your open source tool. But if it comes to Azure, again you can match 100% because you can say in Azure I'm also familiar with these services. So that's how the platform is different, but the entire 9 strategies and process is going to be the same. So that's something that you have to learn on top of what we have learned, because that's how the more you know in DevOps, scope will be increased. Okay, now by saying all these things, now this is when exactly what we wanted to do is come up with a program which can give you all those things that we've been talking about right from the beginning, the fundamentals, your DevOps core, your cloud operations, and also including the advanced topics that we have, plus including the Azure DevOps. Because I don't want you to learn everything in DevOps, but then go and apply to some company who asks only Azure DevOps and you fail. Instead, it's just about another small 10 to 20% that you have to just learn. By doing it, you can easily get a very good profile, and during even a recession time like this, your profile will be matching any kind of organization. Okay, and not just that, that's how you will be able to survive and you will be able to get a better package. Because now what is happening, a simple clue that I can give you is, if a company needs Azure DevOps, for example, people come back and tell me, sir, between AWS and Azure DevOps, now Azure DevOps, they are paying another 3 lakhs or 5 lakhs. Guess why? That's because they are not able to find anyone. So even if you go and just tell them that I know these servers and talk about only the basics, they are easily ready to pay you more. So that's when, if you want to outstand with others, or especially for those who are trying to move abroad, especially to the UK or Europe region, Azure is leading. So that's where I'm not trying to say whether Azure is good or AWS is good. Both are good. But the only thing you need to know is, try to know everything in DevOps as the 9 strategy, learn one cloud operations, plus learn the advanced stuff in such a way that you also know the Azure DevOps services, so that you can easily kind of correlate any profile, and it's not just for surviving, you'll always be able to get a good profile. Okay, so as I said, so my focus through this program is completely to get you all those things that is needed. So take your profile and go ahead and compare it with anyone in the market that you should be able to apply. Okay, so how do we do it? So this is something that we want to divide it into 4 steps. So first, what we want to do is go through the prerequisites. That's our step 1. because whether you're talking to any one of us in the team, we will first insist you to go through that foundation, or what I call it as the prerequisite. Okay. The second thing is learn all the tools that is needed and the concepts needed in DevOps. And the third is learn the advanced side of what is more on the DevOps, not on just the 9 strategies, but beyond it, including your Azure DevOps. And what's the fourth thing that we want to do? And the fourth thing is what we want to do is add more and more and more projects, because it's not about tools, but it's about your knowledge on handling different problems. Okay. Because let's say when you search for DevOps engineers, you will have hundreds to thousands of them. But how do you outstand them? Is you show your knowledge in 2 ways. One is how many things that you know in DevOps to solve problems end to end using those 10 strategies, plus how many new things that you know and how many things that you have implemented. Because for those who have already worked, it will be easy for you to understand, and by the projects what we will go through, you should be able to apply. And but for those who are from non-IT or from freshers, still you should be able to take the same and you can try to deliver. And not just that, another thing that we would like to introduce is what we call it as the case studies, because market is also getting smarter. So now if I train a person wherein he will talk about all the tools, he will talk about all the projects he did, but one simple catch that we can do is, can you tell me what is the technology or what is the domain of your company? People will not be able to explain, because you will talk about using Kubernetes or Jenkins or Docker, but a company like Amazon uses the same tool different. A company like Netflix uses the same tool different. Okay, so that's when we don't want you to just do only the projects, but also get into the case studies where you upskill with your current knowledge, because for those who are working, you already can correlate and add those. But if not, we will also kind of come up with that knowledge, so that don't just go with just only a hands-on knowledge, but go more professionally. Okay, so that's when, if needed, for those who are from a non-IT or from a fresher background, if you try to do these projects at the end, we can help you with an internship which can showcase that you are really hands-on, and not just you have learned, but you have implemented with the real-time knowledge on why this is used in a company and what kind of domain you have solved. So that when I say, oh, you have used Kubernetes, rather than just saying, I have used Kubernetes to run something, rather you should say, this is my organization's problem. To solve such a problem, I have used Kubernetes in this way, and these are the tools that I have achieved. So that showcases that you have a real-time experience. Okay, so that's the whole focus on what we wanted to do to get into this. All right. So by saying this, one last step that I wanted to say is, now we don't want to kickstart our program with the DevOps core, but like I said, if you are from a non-IT or a fresher or even an experienced, we want to first make sure you know all the prerequisites. Like you are familiar with all those things that is needed for Linux, or you are familiar with the basic concepts of what is agile, what is the release process, how does the tool like Git works, and not like that. You also know how does different applications work, because you don't need to know programming, but you still need to know how does that work. Because when a developer comes to you for some help in doing all this IAC or CICD, you don't need to know to write Java, but you should know how Java works, how .NET works, how Python works. So that's where this 5 days masterclass is a prerequisite for everyone, whether if you are aware to brush up, or if you are from non-IT or a fresher, this will help you to know everything that is needed to kickstart. So you can consider this as a foundation level, where get all the knowledge that you need right from the concepts on how organization works, programming, how does build and deployments work, how does release work, and get familiar hands-on with tools like Git and all those things that is needed in agile or release. So this way, whenever you have completed this, then you would like to start your journey, you can start with learning the tools, or what we call it as the core, from different strategies and different tools. Okay, so that's the whole concept, and this we are going to start from July 3rd. So kickstart, and it's, as I said, it's a completely free 5-day sessions open to everyone to know. Okay, fine. So pretty much that's what we had, and I think you should be clear now why you wanted to move into DevOps and what is that market needs. And if you want to get into that and you're expecting now 30 lakhs, 40 lakhs, 60 lakhs, or as people say, you will need 3 times or 4 times salary, first be aware of what are the things that is needed and how your profile can be converted and what are the things that you have to do, because not every one of us are in the same way, right? If you're experienced, you know certain things, so you know where to start and what are the things that you need to add on top of it. If you are a fresher or from a 990, then whatever that I said holds 100% good, because you need to take step by step and don't just stop with only one level, because you know you also have to understand the market, what is requiring, and fill your profile with that. Because if you try to just go with half baked knowledge, this is where I'm saying people say there are not much openings, but you have to think on the other way. Openings are there, but your profile is not screened, your profile is not picked, and that's where the intensity of that profile is increasing. They are ready to pay anything provided you know things what is matching the expectation of a company. So that's what is all about, your career guidance in this session. All right, so I'd like to thanks everyone, but I'll open the session for questions. Thank you.